Hello everyone, it's really great to join you again at this last week of the MOOC. You're making quite a few comments about literacy, and we're noticing some really interesting views. Many people haven't actually thought about including phonics in their teaching before and are now considering building some of the ideas that we discuss, some kinds of phonics activities, into their planning, which is really interesting and great to see.
Thank you, Suzanne. So there are mixed views about when is the right time to introduce the written word. And that's not uncommon, to be honest. Many of you feel that the written word can be introduced alongside the spoken word, so for example, Ella and Utako. But it's important to remember that language distance, so for example, with a language like Chinese, can really affect how much we can draw on first language literacy knowledge and skills. And Utako recognises this. Jazz doesn't seem any reason to wait. And Helen makes a really important point that every bit of exposure helps. And we'd agree with you, Helen. In environments like primary foreign language classrooms, which are relatively input impoverished, written text could indeed extend what we call the extent of input. It's also important to remember that with older primary school learners, written input allows for more explicit reflection on language form and structures. So that could help with supporting the learning of grammar, for example. Interestingly, Carol Ann notes that we shouldn't try to just replicate first language literacy lessons, but instead we should celebrate the otherness of the foreign language that builds cultural knowledge and understanding. And we'd agree there. Exploring differences between languages and helping develop awareness that different languages and therefore different ways of expression exist is a fundamental factor in developing intercultural understanding and global citizenship.
Yes, thanks. And that also perhaps leads on to the interesting point that many of you raised regarding environmental print. We've already noted that literacy could be a means of extending the input that children are receiving. And if you think about how our children learn to read and write in the language used in school, not necessarily their first language, of course, then we realise that children are constantly surrounded by print. Caroline and Nikki recognised the importance of displaying posters, for example, around the classroom, and we're aware that teachers label classroom objects in the foreign language as part of that. If we're thinking about extending input through literacy, then another way is to select a text and/or reading activities just outside children's comfort zone, Carol Ann notes. And notes also that this can engage young learners and develop their confidence, and we'd agree. That's especially true if children are supported by scaffolding, which could include a focus on reading strategies, of course. Most people agree that engaging with foreign language texts is motivating and that actual physical books are important because, as Emily adds, it makes the learning real. Sarah, who contributed the teacher's story in week 2, developed a whole library of foreign language books where children could borrow a book and complete a review which mentioned words that they felt they'd learned and whether they'd enjoyed reading the book. That's a really nice idea, we would say. These were posted on the library wall and children got a house point for contributing. Rebecca similarly suggests that written work could be given for homework too.
Thank you, Suzanne. So now, unsurprisingly, for people concerned with primary education, many of you commented and you're all aware of the importance of keeping the child at the centre of your planning and your decision making. And this has been expressed in many ways in your comments. So a key idea that emerged is that instructional decisions should centre around giving the children a voice. Thomas, for example, mentions that children should be consulted on what to learn, and Ella agrees, adding that you should find out about their interests. Britta considers that not only is each learner different, but that the mix of learners in any particular class has an effect. Therefore, we need to base our decision making on what to do in the class on the basis of individual cohorts of children at any particular point. And this is an example of the breadth and depth of teacher knowledge. And whilst this isn't a focus of this particular MOOC, there's a fair amount of research into what's called teacher cognition. That is what drives language teachers' decision making. And we know that teachers' practices are driven by a very complex blend of contextual knowledge, prior experience as both a teacher and a learner, beliefs about learning, and theoretical understandings. Finally, linking to last week, many of you made useful points about error correction. Jean-Yves, for example, recommends offering error correction to the whole class so that no one feels embarrassed, as well as offering the class an opportunity to respond. For example, does anyone know how to say this? And that's a good idea. Putting children on the spot is never such a good idea. Caroline suggests a breezy, gentle way for error correction is likely to support learning. In a different vein, NK, Catherine and Francis note that peer teaching and feedback can be empowering. But it's important to remember that errors are a normal part of the learning process, and we shouldn't necessarily focus on them too much, and maybe only when the focus of the activity is accuracy, because we want to encourage communication. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's review, and indeed the end of the MOOC. We're so pleased to have shared this journey with you, and we hope that you've enjoyed the course. We'd love to hear more about your views through the weekly questionnaire, so please fill it in for us, it's very important. In the meantime, stay safe, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.